Hello everybody, my name is Luna and welcome back to the channel. So today what we are going to be going over is what I mentioned in the previous video. Sorry, I just had to turn the sound there a little bit so at least we had some sound. I had to mute it because I had the family in here a little while back. Anyway, as I mentioned in the previous video, we were going to go over the base stats: strength, power, dex, pi, and intelligence. And so that I can let you guys know what one is usually the best one and what one's the worst, things like that, and why normally stat lineups, when you see me talking to people in comments, why I usually say certain stat combos usually aren't very good. So, first off, I'm just going to go over mainly items, because I went through the skill list again to make sure I didn't miss anything. I had the majority of skills, like about 80 or 90%. Legendaries, I have about 70, 75, so a good chunk of each one. The only ones I don't have from legendaries are ones you get off monstrosities, disasters, which I'm also going to talk about in this video, like I said in the last, because I also want to go over some tactics with some classes that one of our viewers actually alerted me to, that I actually was unaware. I knew some of it, but I didn't know it to that degree, so I wanted to actually address it. He can take credit for it in the comments. All credit is definitely going to him on this. But I don't want to say his name if he doesn't want it publicly made, because I don't know if his account is his actual name or anything like that. But if he wants to claim it, he's more than welcome to. As I was going, now that we can get that started and out of the way, we'll start out mainly with, I'll start with the abilities because that's a bit easier, because there are a couple abilities actually that I did want to mention. So the main one being this piercing spear right here. This is the main one that I want to go over with abilities, because out of every other type, there is not another ability like this. This thing does 100% damage, 80% accuracy, and it gains increased power on both level 3 and level 8. That is really good. I mean, the level 8 thing, I normally discount that because it is very hard, no matter the ability, unless it's one of the base 4, i.e. this one, this one, this one, or that one. The crit strike, holy bolt, ranged shot, or attack, energy strike, those are the only ones that you can really roll relatively often, and energy strike is actually rarer than the other three. The other three are far more common, and you can get those very easily, with Punisher being right next to it. So that's why I'd place that a bit higher in terms of that, because every other class, I think every class does have something that can pierce through it. In fact, I'm certain that they do. But every single one has to go through loopholes. Either A, you have intelligence, which necessarily doesn't have to go through a loophole, but theirs has like a 3-turn cooldown. Same thing goes for dexes. Then you have, I also think dexes is the first strike too. Then you have strength, which just goes straight through it. No gimmicks, you just need this ability. And they have other abilities that can go through it too, that have the exact same kind of benefits as like some of the pi ones. Because for example, Holy Bolt gains that advantage at a max level. But so does strength with, where is it? Was it Breaker? No, it wasn't Breaker. Bash, there we go. With Bash. So it keeps the same accuracy stat, and your only trade-off is you're gaining 1 turn cooldown. But yet you also have Valk Spear at your disposal for that, which instantly makes them able to go through barriers much better than the other classes. Because even Holy Bolt's other things that ignore barriers, once again, they need to be either leveled up or maxed, or they need to apply penetration, or they just need to have penetration on their build to begin with. That is mainly the only way for them to get through barriers. I know that normally, if you really want to go through barriers, you're just bringing pen, but I thought I would mention it because I think it is a very interesting thing. Because technically speaking, that means you don't have to use pen. You can just have these abilities, and you can instantly go through them, which is a thing that I do quite often. But with that, so we'll go back over here to legendary abilities, legendary items. So with these, this is going to be a bit different. These are going to be much more in plain terms here, because if you also have to keep in mind the classes using them. Like for example, when it comes down to Holy Bolt only your only classes are really going to be using that, unless they're Dex, and I know that Dex has the most popular choice of the basic attack, which is ranged because it hits more. I still prefer attack or the energy strike just because of their overall damage outputs and single blows. The fact that you can deal 150% versus 100%, yes, I know technically you still will deal a total of 300% when you include Graham and hitting the full strength of ranged, whereas if they have their throw shuriken, they're going to be doing 600 if they hit all 6 hits. I know that. However, I still would say that I would pick the other one because it does just a bit more base damage. And personally, I like doing more damage in one hit because it secures more kills if the enemy has like a revive, like say it's the Phoenix, or say they have reflect and I'm not using mirror, or something like that. It just gives me the ability to just get one really hard hit in that can get a kill and we move on, instead of it being hit them 6 times and then kill myself when I've already killed them and these other 3 attacks are just hitting me because they have a reflect. So that's kind of why I prefer those ones. Now then, back to the legendaries. Obviously, the first wave of legendaries were all pretty much the same, just giving them an extra attack, while also buffing up other parameters. To this day, even with all the other legendaries added, that have been added to main roles, these are all still relevant, which is no surprise. Again, an extra attack is never bad in a turn-based game. However, when you look at their other stats that they offer, that's where you start to realize differences. Like, for example, we'll start out with Graham here since it's the first one. The fact that it gives penetration already makes it extremely lethal to the other 3 classes, because all other 3 class types like to have barriers, even strength themselves. A lot of their stuff, even though it mainly relies on high HP, still also don't mind having at least a couple barriers under their belt. So by having a base of a minimum 15% penetration already makes the Graham pretty usable in that front, because there's no class and no strategy, be it even in the other dungeons, minus one dungeon that was an event dungeon, mind you, that had one type of room, which was spellbound. That is the only dungeon where barriers have negatively worked against you, to my knowledge. There may have been another one, but it probably was not nearly as effective as that one, which is why I bring it to light. Then the fact that it adds pursuit, basically giving it another strike, on top of it already giving you an additional hit for strength-based attacks, basically means if you don't penetrate the barriers, you're still hitting those barriers a minimum of 3 times with a basic attack. So I mean, you are slamming a barrier 3 times, easily eliminating at least 3 barriers, possibly just penetrating them and just hitting them directly with damage. That is a pretty high utility kit, especially with Strength's kit, that increases their damages and gives them all this other stuff that you do even more explosive damage with buffs as well, which is another thing we'll get into with some of these legendaries, that already makes this thing a very, very powerful option, and I still say it's probably the best of the 4. Then you go to throw shuriken, and once again, same thing, adding an extra attack just like the other one. Adding blind as a main ability doesn't do much, because the add blinds, the add whatevers, are usually only adding 10%, sometimes 20%. And this doesn't normally it doesn't stack with a multi-hit. So say you have range attack plus 8, you use it, only one of those 3 attacks are going to add blind. Because it's not a passive that's a legendary, it's an add. Yes, when it activates it a second time, it will add it again, but that means it's only adding upwards of 20% blind for a single turn. And even though add action's okay, that one isn't guaranteed to activate like Pursuit. So even though it gives the opportunity to have a ninjutsu-like effect, but better, it's highly unlikely unless you have it upgraded on your character already. So that's where this thing falls behind. Pretty much the throw shuriken needs to have certain things built into your class in order for it to work, and a lot of classes don't just outright have those things, they need to have them added to them in a lab part. Which means that hurts you, because you don't want to ever be building lab parts just to use a single legendary unless you can guarantee that you will always have that legendary. Such as gambling, having alchemy maxed, having a whole lot of luck using the royalty, which is probably really the only class that can kind of guarantee that you'll be able to build your build around a certain legendary. Unless it's one that you capture, in which case it's probably, which again we'll get to in a moment, which would be the one that you would want to use like the Death Knight for. But I mean, once again, its two passives just do not do good. It has a decent ability just like Graham, but again, Graham's is just better. Then we go to Oberon, which I actually really enjoy. As any kind of intelligence class, or roughly any class just because of it, even though there is a better variant, a better version under, once again, strength, that we will be going over as well at some point. This one definitely holds a candle up to Graham, and it's mainly because of during the time it was out and mainly used, and still even to this day, it still can be a very solid pick for a legendary item, even in the intelligence class. The fact that it adds slow, to me adding slow is much better than adding blind. You add blind, sure, they have an extra 20% chance to miss you. Whoop-diddy-doo. That's still not very high, whereas this thing, yeah, it doesn't make it to where they won't hit you, but increases their cooldowns each time you hit somebody, every time they use their abilities. And if you can stack this with stunning people, they aren't ever using their abilities. Their abilities will almost always be on cooldown. You will basically be always fighting a defenseless guy, which again is why there's a better variant of this that we'll end up getting to. But I mean, it is a very powerful one, especially with effective, making it to where it can do it more often. And then lastly, you have Cicadas, which probably comes in third place for it just because of the abilities I can use it. I mean, in terms of the ones I can use it, it actually is probably Pie's best weapon option, because the others come with either huge negatives, or they just aren't good in general, or just aren't very strong. To me, Pie got the really short end of the stick when it came to legendary weaponry, right next to intelligence. Intelligence due to the way they were originally being designed, and then Pie mainly due to what they want to do, but their weapons just don't help them do it. Because Pie is supposed to be similar to Faith from other games. It's supposed to heal you. It's supposed to give you sustain, which is why I like Strength and Pie mixes, because you have Strength as your main damage, Pie giving you more sustain. Yes, I know you can make that up with Vampire, but I mean, no one can really argue that Pie doesn't have the majority of healing abilities, because they do. Which comes into Cicadas. The fact that it gives you extra healing is nice, as well as extra HP and extra damage on a class that doesn't already, on the typings, that don't really have much damage to begin with, easily making Cicadas a very, very good pick. Especially for classes that want more sustain. In all honesty, you could place this in either second or third place, because it is a very, very good item. Even in today's standards, it still can hold a candle. Unlike, in my opinion, the Shuriken, and for the most part, even Oberon kind of struggles, because they're still much better legendaries. But I mean, Oberon can at least kind of hold it, whereas I don't even remember the last time I used Wind Cutter. Because the Wind Cutter is a throw shuriken, by the way. The Wind Cutter is pretty weak, because again, its passives don't do anything. This one at least helps what the gist of them do. Then you have the 4 that only buff stats, which we will go over here as well. The first up is strengths again with Titanic, giving a whole amount of strength, some HP, reflect, and resistance. These ones were the weapons that traded a legendary ability for an extra stat buff. Not bad, not my favorite, but not bad, because usually the abilities are way more impactful than these ones, and that's why you'll see these ones a lot more often than the others, because these were supposed to be legendary, but yet they weren't supposed to be as legendary as like Graham, Cicadas, and the others. Now the Titanic, to me, is okay. I mean, there's a lot of classes that can utilize a lot of that. None of those stats are bad on any of those classes. Let's see, we compare them here. Let me just take a quick look, because I don't remember what each of them have. I would definitely say it's probably one of the worst ones here. There's probably one of the only ones that strength really loses in, and it's because it's adding resistance. Which, to me, resistance is a pretty useless ability, because it doesn't buff anything in particular. It just helps you resist ailments. And even though, yes, as I've said in other videos, and as I normally say, ailments are obviously bad, there are much, much, much better ways to resist them. Resistance back in the day, yeah, was decent, because we didn't have really any full way to resist things minus Angel Light being able to get rid of them. That was it. I mean, yeah, we had Clear Potion, but Resistance and Dreadnought were pretty much our only real way, but still, Dreadnought was superior. Because all you had to do was use Haste, use Godspeed, or even just use Haste, and maybe just take a cooldown ability or something, take a Silver Watch, any of those things if you really wanted to just use Dreadnought, or just outright max Dreadnought, and then, you know, once again, you just have a much stronger resistance feed. Now, if you didn't have the lab parts, or you just didn't have the haste or whatever, then yeah, normally you would opt for resistance, just to make it to where you took less Petrify, or other ailments. But I mean, nonetheless, this wasn't even the biggest worry back then either. Petrify was a much bigger worry now than it was back then. Back then, Reflect was the big issue, because Mirror wasn't really as powerful, it wasn't as easy to get. No one really had the lab part, stuff like that. So I mean, this is already a pretty solid weapon, especially in the time frame it came from. If we count when it came out, yeah, this is probably one of the best weapons out there. But when we count, it probably actually could have held and stood up to Graham. But given where the current state of the game is, it's definitely fallen out of favor. It is no longer a very good weapon. Next up, you have Yggdrasil. To me, this one can still definitely hold up a candle to some of its other legendary counterparts. Maybe not a very good one, but definitely better than Windcutter. Because unlike Windcutter, yes, this thing still gives a dex boost. No, we don't get hit an extra time. But in return, we're gaining a Void, which, for one of the best dex classes, which is the Elf, they love avoidance. Their starting kit's easily one of the best starting kits out of any starter character. If you're a new player to the game, you really should have the Elf as one of your first classes. Because with all of its avoid, the fact that its whole entire kit keeps it alive, its legendary ability, like, you just get so much utility out of a small 1,000 soulstone investment that can take you a long ways. It may not be as strong as it used to be. It may not be an S tier class anymore, but it's definitely, I would still say it's still in the B or A range, even in Karma. And Karma is still easily a B or A. In terms of dungeons, it's still a B or A. Because even though, again, it's not as effective in dungeons because of bind rooms, the enemies obviously having tracking every occasion, stuff like that, it definitely lowers down their effectiveness, but they are still a very, very, very solid class. Especially since this bow works straight with their passive. Because their passive, if they actually are hit to their HP, they just gain a free barrier. No catch included, you just gotta get hit. Free barrier. Well, with this one, when you get hit, not only are you taking some damage, but you're actually lowering your cooldowns by a minimum of 15%, and this number could even go higher, and you still have auto heal with a minimum of 3 health each turn, but let's face it, you're playing a dex class, you're probably using Vampire, no Faith, which means may as well times it by 5, so a minimum 15. And times whatever number you get otherwise by 5. plus your vampire. So you're probably gaining the extra healing that you're missing out on through getting hit, or if they do have something go through you. So all around, this thing just helps the dex builds completely. Because almost all dex builds do the same thing. A lot of avoidance, because that's what dexterity is built around. It's built around low cooldowns and avoidance. Two very good things. Which is why this is probably the second best one, just because of how much. Because also with strength, a lot of them can take advantage of like parry abilities, whereas Pi and intelligence really cannot. Avoidance can be taken advantage of by dexterity. Yes, avoidance can be taken advantage of much more than parry, but nonetheless, one can still be taken advantage of more so than the others, and the other two don't even have anything similar to it. So then you go to Vitor. Once again, this one is still actually relevant. You can still take this one and still see some pretty solid success with it in almost any dungeon. And it's because of the way its core design is. Yes, I know they changed it a bit, but it's still pretty good. Because you have obviously the intelligence boost, and you get an intelligence percentage boost. That's a pretty sizable intelligence strength boost. You are probably going to be buffing yourself probably a good 800-900 from this thing at a minimum in the earlier floors. In the medium floors, you're probably getting upwards of 15-2000. Whereas the other ones would only be giving you about maybe 900-800. Maybe hitting about 1200 if you're the Titanic, but that's about it. Especially with Yggdrasil, it's just not gonna gain that much strength, and neither will Necromonium. They will be strong, but they will not be as strong as Vitor or as Titanic. Vitor easily does the most damage, and giving more accuracy on top of that with finesse. Then you tack on their critical hit strike that they now have. This one can be an absolute devastating monster, because it basically makes their basic attack more accurate, which already has a high damage, giving it a ton of damage, and also helping out give it its crit rate, which a lot of intelligence classes, even though maybe not, I shouldn't say a lot, even though a good amount of them, I guess, would benefit from even having the damage increase and accuracy increase as well as the finesse. Because a lot of their abilities do have at least cooldowns of 1 or 2. Yes, a lot of their best ones have it of 3, but nonetheless, it's still a decent ability. So then that brings us over here to Necromonium, which is probably fighting Yggdrasil for second. Like, none of these are typically bad except for really Titanic, and that's mainly just due to other options and the way the game has evolved. This one is still definitely viable in the Pi class category, because you're still gaining Pi, you're gaining damage resistance, which is already good with Pi classes, and we're talking soul Pi classes like Priest and Angel. I'm not referring to Mixture. Mixture classes, obviously, yes, they have those built into it, but usually they also have their other aspect built into it as well, such as Valkyrie. It is strength and Pi, so it's built both for sustain and damage, making it a very powerful, sustainable class in almost every dungeon. Same thing goes for Paladin, or you have Death Knight. Any of those that really build multiple stats like that are normally going to see good success. Which then comes down to healing. Increases healing effectiveness by at least 25%. That's already a decent chunk. May not be as good as Cicadas, but it at least is a decent health buff, especially to a lot of Pi classes where their armors and their accessories or something similar is usually actually increasing it. And then it's gaining 15% extra experience, which, you know, is kind of just some icing on the cake. It doesn't necessarily go boom, there's a shit ton of experience, but yet at the same time, it is a decent portion to be able to boost you up, especially if you have like boss bonus or something similar. Then we start getting to the basic armors. Griffin Wing, Mastery, Dracula, and Michael's Garment. This was the first set of one that were released with abilities. Once again, this is probably where I would say Strength and Pi really shine. Pi could be seen as a bit stronger, than strengths, but at the same time, the strength one, the only reason why I say that is because it can actually be outdone by tracking. Even though I absolutely still love this armor. This armor is still, in my opinion, one of the best strength armors in the game, but there really isn't a bad strength armor that I can think of, and maybe we'll get to one, and I'll say it, but I can't think of one on top of my head right now. All of these strength armors typically are bringing something good to the table. Griffin Wings is bringing its markdown ability, which for each ability on cooldown, you're gaining parry. So which means if you're ever slowed, if you're ever paralyzed, if you're using high cooldown abilities, you actually have defenses, meaning Willow Stance can be used even if your class isn't built around parry, you can still use Willow Stance, which is great, because Willow Stance is an extremely powerful ability. It's just hard to get the damn thing, at least for me. But then it gives you haste. Yes, it's only haste 1, which doesn't really cool you down all that much, once maybe every 5 or 6 turns. But if you can stack another haste on there, or if you can get it in a lab part, or you get it on a contract, or you have it on another piece of your equipment, whatever, that's instantly going to drastically increase its power. And maybe instead of 1 every 5 turns, you're getting a cooldown. It's like 1 every 2 or 3. And if you can max it, well, then, you're just going to always be having a cooldown at that point. And you can use Embezzle to make that up, which isn't a very expensive lab part either. And then obviously, just gives it a max HP bonus, which is normal for strength armors. But the biggest thing here is the extra defense it adds, the abilities it goes in tandem with, the fact that almost any strength class can benefit from this. Yes, there's one in particular that benefits from it more, being the Samurai because of the extra parry, but any other strength class still gains utility out of this because it's gaining defenses for its abilities being on cooldown, and it's gaining cooldown reduction due to haste. Then we go to Mastery. Go away. Where this one is probably, let's see, what are you doing again? Okay, yeah, so Mastery, probably the worst of the bunch. This is where Dexterity finally gets another short end of the stick with this and their 2-hit thing, Wind Cutter. Because with this thing doesn't boost their health at all, as you can see, which, Dexterity kind of needs. They don't have a high health pool as it is. Enemy health is always better than shield. The only exception being Child Spirit. That's the new class that came out, and it's only because it gains more power from it. Every other class that I've used, if you can't get your health back, or you have a really low health pool, you're extremely vulnerable now. You are not a very powerful class. It's why legendaries like Aegis, which as much as I love Aegis in other games, as much as I love the Legend of the Shield itself, it's really not a good item. I sometimes take it anyway, just because, I'm stupid. But it's still not a very strong item, because it converts your HP to shield. And if you have Eternal Dark, this can be a death sentence. Because there's so many things that can outright just steal your shield and your barriers, that they just absorb it all. Like those wisps in this current dungeon, they can just take it, and it becomes theirs. So you just fed your enemy that you're not going to have to bust down that much more health, and you probably only have like not even a 10% fraction of what your shield is. I'm not saying Aegis doesn't give you a shitload of defense. I'm just saying it's been largely power crept completely to mainly uselessness, because back when it came out, yes, you could use it. It was a very solid defensive ability. Unless someone penetrated through your shield, you were pretty okay. And even then, penetration was hard to do without, piercing spear. That was pretty much the only way to really go fully through it. So, and even then, it only had a chance. It didn't guarantee you'd go through shields. It only had a chance. So Aegis was still a pretty usable ability, and because it gave Dreadnought on top of it, it just made it even better. Now, you take Dreadnought, and it's like, well, you're probably going to die in the next couple floors, especially with Eternal Dark, because you won't be able to just drop it and get rid of it, versus if this is a floor you know a monster is going to be on that doesn't have it, then you can just take Aegis and you know you'll have the extra sustainability. But it's definitely fallen out of favor, which goes right in tandem with this thing. Even on the newest classes, it would not take this armor. This armor's only good capability is your shield will remain active after each battle, meaning it stacks its shield. Even back then, unless you could get this and Aegis, would be the only time, maybe you could get away with it. Otherwise, not really. And then just giving resistance, once again, we've already been over the resistance, just doesn't really do much. Dracula. When it comes to HP, this is where I don't really know where they were thinking. There are very, 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 very few intelligence classes. Like, I think I can only count 2, 3 maybe, off the top of my head, that actually have a decent sized health pool to where they can take advantage of this armor. And that is the Vampire, the Sylph, and Evil Knight. Well, I guess Dark Knight too, but to me they're kind of the same thing. They are the only 2 intelligence, and the 2 of those, actually 3 of those 4, aren't even soul intelligence. 2 of them are strength intelligence, 1 is an intelligence pie, and the other one is actually an intelligence, being the Vampire. But the Vampire also doesn't have a huge health pool. She has a better one than a lot of the other intelligence users, but not by much. And it's because her passive ability cuts her health in half. If it wasn't for the passive ability doing that, even though I know it heals her, again, you are losing half your health. Why would you do this? That means you have to have willpower and frenzy just to make it up. And usually willpower and frenzy are known to be ridiculously strong because of how much you gain out of them for such a little cost. They are 2 of the best abilities in the game. And they aren't even legendaries. Willpower can be found on certain armors. That is probably one of the only things intelligence has over some other classes. Why they made it an intelligence armor, I'm not 100% certain. Because especially with his name, you would have thought they would have just made it pie or strength. Mostly pie, just give pie even more of a better armor, since they seem like they're supposed to be the armor thing now. And then, it would have gone on the class that it seems like it was completely made for. But who knows, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there's another class that I'm not thinking of that you actually want to use it more. But anyway, we're talking about Dracula. Which means its soul eater ability is pretty worthless. You're healing your HP to full, but you're taking 50 barriers of damage. You're taking barrier damage. You're taking shield damage. You're taking all this damage before they even get to your health. So with you taking all this damage before they even get to your health, how are you even going to utilize its passive anyway? And with such a low health pool, how are you going to survive an attack to survive to be able to use this thing's passive ability? To tack on to add insult to injury, you don't have the damage resistance to survive an attack with this. Because you gotta realize also with these other things, they aren't only trying to compete with themselves, they're trying to compete with power. So if you're a strength class, your legendaries aren't only competing with strength, they're competing with the power legendaries as well. Because power goes under all 4 categories. It increases all 4 categories. So which means a power class instantly has access to every single legendary, every single ability in the entire game, which makes Rover one of the most versatile classes in the game. Yes, there's some other ones that utilize power, but I think Rover does it a lot better based on what I've seen, because it's able to ignore reflect, it ignores damage over time, it ignores one of the other damage types, I can't remember what it is. And it just has overall a decent starting kit as well as a decent amount of other stuff. It gains good damage resistance, good resistance, just good stuff all around. But even it wouldn't want this armor. Yes, it could use it and it would be benefited from it because unlike the actual intelligence classes, he gets hit, it's hitting his HP most likely, which means he's going to heal off of it. That's great. Anyone else? No. Alright, then we go over here to Michael's garment. This thing, I love this armor. And if it wasn't for its passive, it actually would be a whole hell of a lot worse. It is definitely not the best of the four. Griffin is definitely the best of the four. But Michael's garment comes close if they changed one thing about it. If they just made one different typing, and that's the shield. If they change the shield to an HP boost, whether it's the literal HP boost, or it's an HP percentage, or just an HP plus in general, even if it's one of those ones that just increases it by level, like soil armor does, that still will be enough to bring this thing to be better than Griffin. And the reason is Revelation. The fact that Revelation deals damage each time you heal based on your heal, and it doesn't count as an actual attack, it's just blatant damage, and the only way to stop it is to be bled, is huge. Because that means you're not triggering reflect. You're going through barriers 9 times out of 10 with this thing, even if you don't even have reflect. Pen, it's usually still going through it, so you're still hitting them. The majority of Pi classes are healing anyway, which means that this is just adding more damage to their already weakened damage, but if you add Cicadas and this thing, that equals quite a bit of fucking damage right there. Sorry, language there, but I mean, that is quite a bit of damage, especially when you get to one of their accessories that boost their healing even higher. And if you're the main healing class, which is Angel, which is the class that benefits the most from this. That class gets ridiculously stupid when it has this ability, as well as other legendaries to help back up its healing, as well as other things to help back up its healing even more. Like, you can literally make a build of nothing but Angel Light and one strong healing ability, and you will just be almost unkillable. As long as you have a way to cool them down. And then lastly, we get to these ones. Yes, we are going to go over all of these things. So, I mean, be ready for a long video, because this was not going to be short. I already knew that. I knew the moment we were explaining it, we'd have to take it armor by armor, item by item, explain the history of the games, explain why they were there, and all that stuff, and why it's kind of the point why I think certain groups are better. And in all honesty, in this case, if you made this far already, thank you enough. I'll just tell you outright, I think strength's strongest. If you want more justification and you still aren't fully sold, hear me out. I mean, yes, this is probably once again going to be a long-ass video, probably upwards of an hour. I'm hoping not, but it might be. So then we go to another base 4 stats. Once again, these ones are pretty old and outdated. But you start out with General's Armor, which is probably the best of the 4. This is definitely the one I use the most out of the 4. And here's why. A strength boost, a very solid HP boost, a damage resist, and you still get a random ability. Keep in mind, most of these weapons, I think every legendary has at least one random ability still given to them. But we aren't normally calculating the random ability because that's RNG. We're calculating usually what they're given at a base. And this, all around, is nothing but this is an armor. It increases your power, gives you a ton of sustain. This is a good armor. On average, that damage resist is usually 20 or 25%, which is a good damage reductor already. I mean, you're ignoring a fifth or a fourth of your damage intake, and usually you're getting a pretty sizable health boost from your standard armor. which means you're probably, in all honesty, taking a whole lot less when you calculate in the extra health. Then when you take into effect you're gaining more strength, you're probably gaining more strength than your default armor gives you. Heck, if you don't have a legendary sword, you may even be gaining more strength from the armor than you are your sword. All around, General's armor, still very effective. And it can easily hold its own ground up against Griffin Wing, and it can easily hold its ground against the other strength legendary armors in the game still. Which is kind of impressive because not every armor or every item that was made, especially back then, can say the same. Whoops. So then we go to Cloak of Haze. For some reason, they had some fantasy that decks would want to increase their shield. Why they thought this, I don't know, because, I mean, again, they made you Drasil do auto heal, so you can already see that they were adding auto heal to their capabilities, so why they suddenly just throw a shield in the mix of it is beyond me. But for some reason, they thought that their other two shields, like they thought that it was going to be decks that wanted it, when a lot of their stuff never really used shields. Like mostly they still built HP, so once again, this Cloak of Haze already hurts itself because it builds shield, it does resistance, and avoidance. The best thing out of all of it is the avoidance. But the majority of your dex classes have avoidance already on their armors at default, as a guaranteed drop. Some don't, yes, but most do. Which means you have almost no reason to use this armor. Unless you're just taking it because you want a huge avoid boost and your class doesn't get it. That is the only reason I think you would take this, but I believe there's a better cloak that we're going to talk about that goes in the accessory slot instead of armor slot. Then you go to Doctorate. This one, again, isn't the best, but is definitely still usable in the intelligence builds, because it gives you effective, which, again, as we know, these guys, the intelligence classes do like to add status effects, like slows, weakens, things like that, especially delay damage, even though I don't like it. It increases their effectiveness, which in turn helps them get it off, even though, again, it's still kind of like a I need this to work ability more than this just makes me better ability, unlike General's armor, which quite literally just makes the whole classes better. They don't need it to work. They can easily use their other armors, and they will be just fine. This is just like, okay, out of these two picks, this is the better option. When it came to Dracula or Doctorate was a lot stronger because it gave you effectiveness, and it gave you some shield, as well as intelligence, over just an overheal and some max HP healing. So, this was more of a, I am just slightly better than my other choice than anything else. And then you have Bishop Vestment. This one was definitely the damage armor. In all honesty, you could go with either Bishop Vestment or Michael's Garment, and you would be just fine either way. Both of them were very good armors. And even Bishop's Vestment, to an extent, not as much. It's definitely been power crept a lot more than General's, just because of Pie's amazing armor selection now. But it definitely still can be used and see some decent success. Because it's still a decent armor. I mean, you're gaining some health bonuses, you're healing every time you move rooms, and you're gaining a sizable damage increase to your Pie, which, as we've said before, Pie badly needed. Because their abilities, even though it seems like on paper, yeah, they do about the same amount of damage, in practice, it does not work that way. If you use the Angel and you use Holy Bolt, and then you go to a Dragoon and you use Attack, you're going to do more damage with the Attack than you will the Holy Bolt. And it's because their base ability stuff, at least in the very early thing, yes, you'll do the exact same amount of damage because you both have 10 damage on your damn starting weapon. But as the floors increase, you'll notice your damage is getting separated more and more. And as your experience increases, you'll see that the damages decrease more and more between Pie and that. Because they just don't gain as much. They gain more off their armors, yes, but they don't gain nearly as much off their weapons. Which makes it to where usually strength will quickly outdo any of the other classes in terms of raw damage output, making it to where Pi is really only good for healing. Thus, the only reason why it's really taking second place here is mainly because the other two options are so bad. Like, they really could have given those other two much better choices, and it probably would have been a lot better. Then you had the next start for all of these things, where it was literally just a master of whatever thing here, and you were just reducing your cooldown by 1 on all of them. So we'll start out with the strength one, I think. Let me see, now I double check that. Yeah, we'll start with strength. So strength, keep in mind all these get limit break, at least I think they do, don't they? Yeah, they do, I thought so. So which means the only difference is mainly going to be that second ability. Now, strength giving accuracy fixes a lot of the strength deficiencies, as we've said before. Strength classes do usually have low accuracy abilities, such as Thrash having only a 45% accuracy, but yet it hits 3 times, or you have like Giant Slash, or whatever it's called, Tornado Slash, that has like I think it's like a 600 power or 500, but yet it has like a 40% accuracy. Like, this thing just boosts a lot of the strength aspects to really make their strongest move shine, that it easily is still relevant, and I still will pick up this glove still. The Strength Master Gauntlet is still one of my favorite gauntlets in the game, because it still boosts a lot of strength abilities, even ones that don't necessarily need it. Even again, the core base accuracy boost is still really good. Accuracy boosts, to me, are still really nice, because it allows you to use slightly less accurate attacks and still hit your target, meaning you can still use higher damaging attacks that usually are balanced by the fact that they need to use low accuracy and don't hit that often. Well, with this increased accuracy gauntlet, you don't have to waste a slot on Eagle Eye or whatever. You just can gain the extra accuracy from there, which to me helps it out a lot. Then you go to its dexterity equivalent, Gomon. Now, unlike Strength Master, I don't know why they did this, because it's kind of a weird aspect to just throw on a gauntlet, and it's luck. Why you threw luck on this gauntlet, I do not understand. Because dexterity is all about cooldowns, avoidance, and damage. At least that's all it was back then. To an extent, it still is, just not as much. It's more focused around avoidance than it is anything else, but it's still close. Well, avoidance and multi-hitting. But, I mean, you just add luck? I mean, I know that this helps the royalty out, but I mean, the royalty didn't come out until like 3 years after this thing was, actually I think it was more like 4 years after this thing came out. So it's like, you can't really tell me he already had that thing planned. So who is this helping? Not really anybody. Even back then, it wouldn't really help. You were taking it more for his other passives, more than his luck passive. His luck passive was just a bonus. That's all it was. Unlike Strength's accuracy gauntlet, where the accuracy actually is benefiting its user, this thing is kind of just there. Which means unless its random ability does something, this thing can't really be said as much better. Then you have Mimir, however you want to say it. This one's also really good, because it gives a crit increase. And under no condition is a crit increase bad. Unless, you know, they have a void critical, then I guess maybe. Because then they just can't be one-shotted. But again, under the 99.9% of circumstances, except for avoid critical circumstances, critical will basically always kill, making it insanely powerful. And because it has the same thing as the others, it's not reliant on its others' random ability. Then you have Hermes. Once again, this one fits right into the Pi section, and is still usable even still, to where you just gain extra healing effectiveness. Again, something Pi users use quite often. Even if you choose to go a vampire route, Like, say you're using a paladin and you're going a vampire route so that you vampire people instead of use basic healing abilities, this thing still helps with that. Healing effectiveness still stacks with vampire, which is another reason why I say Angel Light is so powerful and such a staple ability. Because not only does it cure an ailment, but it also gives you healing effectiveness, heals you for 10% of your health. The fact you're basically gaining 100% healing effectiveness, almost doubling what you're healing, if not doubling it, pretty much means if all you need is at least a 20% vampire bonus, and you'll be probably healing more than enough to sustain your life. Like, unless you've been bled, is probably the only time you're going to have to worry about your own HP, because at that point, you're healing the 10% just for using Angel Light, and then you're healing off of your attacks anyway. And if you have auto heal, well, I mean, it also stacks with that. So, I mean, you're healing even more. Maybe auto heal ain't healing you much. Auto heal kind of needs no faith in order to be usable, but I mean, nonetheless, it's still a pretty solid buff. Then we go to miscellaneous items. Holy hell, we have a long way to go. So I think what I'm going to actually do is I'm going to cover these next 4 items so that we get through the basic miscellaneous, and then we'll cover wave 2s and all of that in another video, because I have to get homework done. So starting out with Dragon's Eye, this thing is still viable. Very much still viable. And it's because this thing does nothing bad. This thing is just all good. Even its random, it has to be a pretty bad random ability to actually fuck this thing up. Like, usually you have to be getting upwards of Simplify, and you're just not built for using Simplify, or it has to be like Frenzy, and you don't have willpower, unless you know you're a Moon Queen, and in which case, you know, you just don't give a shit. But, I mean, again, any class can pick up this item, use it, and you're going to see some good results. That Strengthen is normally 25%. I know it says 7, but normally it's 25. The accuracy rating normally varies. The critical is usually another 20, 25, and then you gain a limit break, which gaining a limit break already is useful. Because gaining a limit break is pretty important in this game, especially if you're going for a floor 100 run. If you're only going for floor 25, you really probably only need limit break 1, maybe limit break 2. But if you're doing a floor 100 run, you usually need limit break maxed. Because otherwise, you're going to get one-shotted midway through. Because things will get so strong that you have to have those options. And it kind of helps you even ignore it at the early stages, because critical hits ignore limit break. It can go through it. And the fact that it just outright strengthens a percentage of damage instead of just giving power or giving a base set stat means as long as your other 2 equipments are growing, you never have to trade this thing out. If you find a good one, you can pretty much hold on to this thing indefinitely until you die, or until it gets degraded, unless you have plating, like I usually do, so that I can't be degraded. You can have this thing basically for your whole run. Meaning you get it on floor 1, you have a damn amulet from floor 1 that you're probably never going to replace. Unless you get a better one. And then you go to Phantom. I understand what Phantom's trying to do here. Really, I do. And I mean, if you are using a gambling build, or you're using anything that you can just keep re-rolling or whatever, yes, that is where this item shines, because that's its main purpose. It's supposed to earn you soul stones, because that's why it has greed +1, so that you can earn more soul stones for your re-rolls, which is also why it has boss bonus, so that you can add 2 more boss bonus to it to add even more soul stones, so that you can also then use its luck factor to obviously re-roll. I understand why this thing exists. It exists for a very good reason. It really helps you get more legendaries later on in the game when you actually have the equipment to do it. but I would say that this thing has been severely power crept, mainly due to the fact that Kenton Gold exists, gambling is a lab part, royalty exists. It's not necessarily bad, it's just been hugely made unnecessary. You can still pick it up if you can't get any other legendary and you just want a better chance. Again, it's still useful, just not as good as others. Then you have the No Mask, the worst of the four. This thing, again, I can kind of see what they were thinking with this. They were thinking intelligence classes would want to use this, but, I mean, let's face it, if intelligence class had the option between this or their stone or whatever, because intelligence has some really nice accessories that we'll probably end up getting to in the next video, because that's where they really start seeing some real stuff for them. But, because this and the list below it, upwards to, let's see, it's about right there. We're document. No, it wasn't a document. Well, yeah, because there was ages. So yeah, it was about to document where the first wave of stuff ended. So we still have a little bit to go, but again, it'll have to be in our video because this thing's already approaching an hour long. But anyway, back to No Mask. This thing only buffs shield. Most classes, once again, especially nowadays, don't want shield. Back then, again, yeah, that would be okay. But not still very good, especially on the classes that would want to use its other ability, which is effective. There was almost no other class back then that would really use effective unless you were adding fragile, adding weaken, or something similar along those lines to the enemy. Otherwise, you never used it, and even then, intelligence was still better at using ailments. The majority of other classes' kits did not use this, except maybe a damn Dark Elf, but I've always thought Dark Elf was one of the worst classes because it basically did everything intelligence did but worse. The only thing it had better than intelligence is it could avoid a little bit. The Half-Fling outdid it in every single category, because it could actually use the intelligence engine. Yes, I know they've kind of fixed it to be more first strike oriented, and a bit more of a looter, but nonetheless, he's just left a bad taste in my mouth. This whole No Mask, like the best thing about this mask is it gives you extra experience, and the limit break. Other than those two aspects, this thing is you have almost no reason to take this in your accessory slot. Unless in your accessory slot the item is so bad that it just don't matter, you have no reason to take this thing. And then finally you have Philosopher's Stone. Definitely in second place if you have, well, it's definitely the one, correction, if you have gambling and you have everything else, this thing has aged amazingly. This thing is still probably the second best, if not the best of these four. It would be a really close call between Dragon's Eye and Philosopher's Stone, because even if you don't have the Soul Stone, Philosopher's Stone still gives you an extra 2 rerolls for free. It also gives you Haggle, which decreases reroll cost. You gain Avoid Traps so that you can't be slowed, paralyzed, or anything like that from traps, and you still gain Limit Break. Yes, you don't gain any base health stat bonus. You can find one with it on there sometimes, but yet it doesn't do it. But it doesn't really need to, because its main use is for re-rolling. So if you have gambling, which if you're lucky you'll even get one of these with that on there, you can usually, in those 3 rolls, have at least a chance to find a better high quality weapon, especially if you have Blacksmith already. Or if you just don't care about soul stones and you already have all you need, you basically take this thing, set it up with gambling, and you're gonna have all of your legendary needs taken care of. And just like Dragon's Eye, you don't really need to replace this thing unless its random ability is something you find necessary and eventually comes so out of date that you could do more damage by taking another item or by having more sustain or whatever the case may be that you're trying to increase more. So with that said, we're through the first set of items. I know a lot of these we haven't really gone in the real nitty gritty of it yet. We've only gone through the basic parts of it. So I know that we haven't gotten to the real big ones yet, because back then, this is where things were more or less, everything did the same thing. It really came down to their classes' passives and their abilities as a whole, which is why things like the elf and the dragoon were so largely used. And then when the angel got released in the first event, that one also took off because it got around. But then the rover was used before then, and the rover still maintained its strong status and still is a very strong class, just like its other two counterparts. But nonetheless, this is a look back at the past. This is like nostalgia era stuff here, and we're still probably going to have another round of nostalgia era stuff for a little while. Yeah, it looks like we will, because we won't get to the newest items until we hit right there around, yeah, around Reagan-ish? Yeah, it looks like around Reagan. Because I'm not including the boss things, which is all of those minus Lover's Gift. That one was actually an older one. Yes, what's this? Alright, so yeah, it starts at Sun God. That's the newer one. I know Sun God itself was an older armor. System Core was not, though. Or, no, actually it's Eternal Dark. Eternal Dark starts the new wave. Never mind, because I remember the ray gun being in the past, too. So, yes, it will start out with Eternal Dark. So, I mean, we still got a pretty hefty chunk to go. I know that all those boss things are ones used by other stuff, but I don't have all of them yet. And I don't want to start listing them off as a reason why one class is better than another when I don't have them. Because who knows, these things, when I have them, my whole opinion may change. And who knows, maybe intelligence, which I think is the worst, may end up being actually the best due to their legendary options through other monsters. I mean, for example, I already think there's an amazing legendary option here, which is known as Hunting, which you get from one of the asshole conquests. The only problem is this thing is best suited for the Dragoon because it gives Imperial Wrath by default. Even though it's useful for other classes, it doesn't do you any good if your class doesn't have any real reflect on it. Like, I mean, I had on a Paladin and it was only doing 1 damage. 1 damage. I mean, yeah, that 1 damage takes out barriers, but, I mean, unless you're trying to fish out barriers, that thing doesn't do anything for you. And unless you use several attacks, it still don't do anything for you. So its only real benefit, its best benefit anyway, is on a Dragoon. Otherwise, you're losing a lot of effectiveness out of the blade. But I mean, since it gives 2 power bonuses, usually this thing is still pretty damn strong, even able to rival some of the ones we went over, and some of the other ones that we didn't go over that we'll end up going over in the next video, probably tomorrow. Once again, thank you all for watching. I'm sorry this video was so damn long. Hopefully the next one, since we don't have to go over some classes, and we also don't have to go over the abilities, it will be a bit quicker. It should anyway, since we'll only be going over some armors and the weapons. But without further ado, thank you all for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video.